Jemma Stratton is a social worker and pediatric oncology therapist with the Nova Life with Cancer program. She obtained her bachelor's in social work from James Madison University and her master's in social work from the University of Washington with a specialization in healthcare practice. At Life with Cancer, Jemma provides therapeutic support to children, adolescents, and families impacted by cancer. Jemma's clinical focus includes adjustments to diagnosis, child development, and pediatric bereavement. Currently, in addition to community outreach, Jemma also hosts Life with Cancer Teens Connect events and facilitates for the Life with Cancer Grief Circle program. Jemma, we are so thankful to have you join us today. And again, thank you to each of you for taking the time to be here this morning as well.
Thank you, Erica, for that introduction. And thank you all for having me here today to talk to you about this topic. I appreciate you all coming to this webinar, and we are going to talk about a wide spectrum of information, strategies, and just resources for cancer-related support, specifically for children and adolescents. Statistics show us that the majority of people are going to be impacted by cancer in some way, whether that be through their own diagnosis, whether that be through the diagnosis of a loved one, a family member, a neighbor, someone in their community. And so this presentation is really ideal for those parents, caregivers, family members, and supportive adults who are wanting to learn more about how they can support a child or an adolescent who's going through that and has someone that they love with a diagnosis. And as mentioned, my name is Jemma, and I am a social worker here at Life with Cancer, and I will have the opportunity to talk a lot more about our program specifically later in this presentation. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of a summary of the information we're going to go through today. And I know it'll be a lot of information, and I really try to make sure that I cover information that's applicable across the age ranges. So as you can see, we will talk about some child development, things that would be helpful to know. And I do talk about different age groups, and as well as when I talk about the activities and strategies, many of them are going to be applicable no matter how old the child is, though there will be a few that might be specific for a particular age group. And as Erica mentioned, we will have that Q&A portion. And so just keeping in mind, keeping those personal details protected and keeping questions general. And then if you do have anything more personal, especially about cancer, you'll have information about how to get in contact with us for one-on-one support later on. And the last note I want to make is I know that this topic can be challenging and that talking about cancer can be sometimes a difficult conversation. And so if it's ever feeling kind of difficult or emotions are coming up for you, please feel free to take a break, step away from the webinar. It's important to validate and allow for those emotions because they do come up during these conversations. And so I want to address the first question that might come into your mind when thinking about talking to a child about cancer. And that's kind of why talk about it. Sometimes people's first response is, they're too young to be talking about this. This is an adult problem. This is an adult issue. And I think there's a lot of really valid questions and worries people have when they're thinking about talking about cancer. Cancer can feel like this taboo subject, and it can be really uncomfortable to bring up with a child and not know exactly what language to use. And some of those concerns might be, my child's too young to understand. They don't know what's going on, or I don't want them to be scared. I don't want them to worry. Maybe they knew someone that has died from cancer, and so you don't want them to be scared of that for their loved one, or they need to focus on school. This is a common one we see parents and caregivers worry about with their adolescents, especially. And these concerns might come up no matter who the loved one of your child is, whether it is a parent, a family member, or a friend. And they're very common, and they're a natural response to a really difficult situation. And even with those worries and concerns, I do want to stress that honesty is always our clinical recommendation. We really don't give kids enough credit for what they pick up on, whether that be body language, hushed voices, red eyes, more phone calls. They're noticing there's more, their parent or loved one is not in the house as often. Maybe relatives and visitors are all of a sudden stopping by. People are being, nicer to them than what they're used to, or giving them gifts or extra attention. And so we often find that kids actually know something's up before they're even told. And so by being honest and opening up that conversation, it creates that open environment that allows for them to talk about it, ask questions, and just feel comfortable sharing how they feel about it. It also allows for the identification of myths, misconceptions, irrational beliefs. If you don't talk about it, you won't be able to catch the misinformation that your child might be misunderstanding or confused about. So, they might be trying to connect the dots on their own, like, okay, dad has been out of the house for a while. He goes to all these doctor's appointments and they're trying to connect the dots. And it's very common that kids don't always have, all the right information about cancer. They might have heard it from, TV or movies. And so by talking about it, you can identify, okay, this is what they don't quite understand. This is what information they need. Also, research supports that age-appropriate information actually reduces worry and fear and anxiety. Anxiety can heighten in a family where there is a lot of confusion or unclear information. And the research supports that kids experience less anxiety when they have the explanations for the observations they're making around them. And it provides you that really good foundation to have continuous and appropriate communication throughout the entirety of that loved one's cancer treatment. And so now that we've covered the why, I want to talk about the how. And I think that's a lot of times the first barrier that families come across. Like, how do I even start having this conversation? And first and foremost, it's preparing yourself, whoever you may be for that child, a parent, a caregiver, a supportive adult. Preparing yourself is going to be just as important as preparing the child. Consider making sure that you have the whatever support you need to have, whether that be your own emotional support, confiding in a friend, talking it over, talking with the oncology team, maybe the nurse navigator, making sure that you know the information that you'll be talking about and you have some of those questions answered for yourself. And you want to take time to process those feelings and think about what you want to share, and if you are telling the child or teen on behalf of the person with cancer, so maybe they're not their grandparent or friend or a neighbor, check in with that person first, the person who's the patient, and see what they would like to be shared. Not all the information needs to be shared right off the get-go. In fact, that can be very overwhelming, both for the child or teen or for yourself. And so kind of figuring out, okay, what are we actually going to talk about during this conversation? And of course, practice if needed, especially with the younger kids, you might be being like, okay, how do I talk about cancer in a way that a 4-year-old can understand? It can be helpful to practice. And when I get into the child development section, I'll actually give some language recommendations for each age group. And then choose the time in a setting that will work best for that child or teen. And some of the factors I want you to consider when thinking about this is, a quiet setting, that there won't be a lot of interruptions. They're not going to be rushing off to a soccer game in 30 minutes. Needs are met, so they're not hungry, thirsty, tired. A good calm moment. Sometimes it can be an instinct to take the child or teen somewhere they really enjoy, like their favorite restaurant or their favorite place to be. And we do encourage keeping the setting pretty neutral or doing it in their home. And that's because, it's a safe environment, it's a neutral environment, and that way they don't have to associate something that they already really enjoyed with a difficult conversation. And then also consider what associations they might have about cancer. Have they ever known anyone with cancer? Do they know what that is? And how did they react before? So if now, mom has cancer, but they knew a neighbor had had cancer, thinking about, okay, what was that experience like for them? How did they react? What were some of their questions then? And it can help you anticipate what some of the things they might be worried or wondering about this time around. And so having that conversation, of course, you're going to be providing age-appropriate information. And so these conversations are going to look vastly different depending on your child's age, their temperament, and these past associations they might have. But kind of the basics to think about is naming that it is cancer. It is definitely very tempting to say, mom is sick, or using some vaguer terms and saying, cancer, they don't understand what cancer is. But we really do encourage the use of the word cancer because it gives that child and teen language to talk about it. I'm going to get into this later on, but certain age groups haven't really figured out how to differentiate serious and simple illness. And so not only by just naming cancer will give them language to use when they have questions about it, but it'll help differentiate for them the difference between the medicine, dad is getting for cancer and the medicine they get for when they have a runny nose. And it also just keeps everyone on the same page. Sometimes when more bigger terms are used, like, mom is sick, and then maybe a family member makes a comment and says, mentions the word cancer, it can kind of put, that child or teen shock them because they haven't heard that word be used associated to their parent before. It's helpful to let them know where it's located in the body. And of course, this information and the details that you'll include will differ depending on age, but, is it, skin? Is it like, cancer in the skin? Is it cancer in the stomach? Letting them know where it is in the body. And then kind of how the cancer is treated. This is going to differ depending on each situation because, of course, every cancer treatment is going to be very different. And so I really recommend just thinking about what's the first thing that's going to happen. You don't necessarily need to get down the line of, okay, first we're doing testing and then we're going to do chemo and then we're going to do radiation. There could be a lot of different treatments that will come down the line. Just focus on whatever the first step is, the one that's going to be happening most observably first. Kind of talking about what treatment may look like, what to expect from that treatment, and then really with this information focusing on how will their lives be affected. Kids and teens are going to be most affected by whatever they can observe. They won't really understand everything that might be happening if their loved one is having an inpatient stay, but the things that will be noticeable to them are if maybe there's a lot of fatigue after chemo, their parent might not be able to pick them up from school or go to their soccer games. And so letting them know beforehand, that this might be a change you'll notice. Another example of a change is hair loss. If, their loved one is going through chemo, that's going to result in hair loss. Let them know that that's a possibility and that this is what it's going to be like when that happens and that they'll know when it's going to happen, and preparing them for something that's going to be very observable. While having this conversation, it can be helpful to kind of figure out what ideas they have already. That can be as simple as just asking them, what do you know what cancer is? Have you heard that word before? What do you think of when you think of the word cancer? Kind of seeing, okay, what do they already know? And taking your child's lead. They may have many, many questions and they may have none. And there's no right or wrong there. It really depends on that specific child or teen's needs and how they're processing the information, what their past associations are. For some young kids who I've never really heard the word cancer before, it's just a word to them. It's just like school bus or homework or, banana. It's just a word. And so they might not have a lot of questions. It might not really sink in, and they will take a lot more time to really process and figure out what are they worried about? What is changing? But if they do have questions, it's really important to answer them honestly. That doesn't mean you have to give every single detail, but giving them an answer that's simple, concise. And I really encourage parents and caregivers to think about, if a child is ready to process and ask the question, figure out what question they want to ask, they're likely ready to hear an answer. And so we'll now be kind of transitioning into talking about what you need to know and expect based on child's age and development. And so I'm going to be going into specifics for each age group. And so some of them may be more applicable to yourself or others. So I encourage you to think about kind of what child that you're hoping to support in this and thinking about how this information will apply to them. And within each section, I will provide examples of what language you can use with this age group when talking about diagnosis, treatment, side effects. And these scripts are not, you need to read them exactly. It's just to help you kind of get an idea of what that language looks like. And then you can take these building pieces and create something that works for your family and for that conversation for you. So I'm going to start with the youngest. We're talking birth to 2 years old, infants to toddlers. And some of you might be thinking, well, they can't have a conversation around cancer yet. And that's true. They won't have that understanding of really illness or cancer. Maybe in the later years of toddlerhood, they understand the words around someone can be sick. But really an understanding of the concept of illness, especially more serious illnesses, won't be there developmentally for them yet. However, what they can understand are routines. They understand when the routine changes. They can sense when things are different around them, when the behaviors or feelings of the people that take care of them are different, and they can be very responsive to those changes. And so it's important to keep in mind that that's something that they can process even as infants. And so What you may notice, and what I mean by this is these might be adjustment behaviors. These are expected and age-appropriate behaviors that might happen during a time where there's some change in the home due to cancer. So what you may notice is maybe some more difficulty self-soothing. Those habits may change for them. So maybe they're not eating as much during their meal times as they used to. Maybe they're not sleeping at the same times they usually do it in the day, or they're not sleeping for as long. You might notice some separation anxiety, especially if the person that was providing most of their caregiving tasks can't provide those as consistently. You can see that extra clinginess and increased tantrums, just some irritability. And so although I don't have any language recommendations with this age, because it's really not about the language, it's going to be about how you can maintain routine and help them adjust to these changes. And so think about keeping as much of the routine as possible structured and regular. So of course, there's going to be some changes that might have to happen. If family members or trusted adults will be assisting with caregiving tasks, provide time for that child to get used to being around them and transition slowly. So if okay, when I start treatment, I'm not going to be able to do, some of these, I'm going to need someone to help put him down for naps, my baby down for naps. Thinking about that beforehand and being like, okay, well, if grandma's going to be coming to help, I'll have her start coming and doing some of those before my treatment starts. So that way the baby gets used to having grandma put him down for naps and maybe not mom or dad. So now going into this preschool age, 3 years to 5 years old. And so at this age, they're getting a basic understanding of simple illness, tummy aches, headaches, ouchies when they fall down, getting a cold and having a runny nose. But their understanding of a much more serious illness, like cancer, is going to be very limited. Though we are seeing kids younger having more of an awareness of serious illness now because of the pandemic, and just, the conversation around illness has been a lot more on the forefront. There's still the actual concept of that, and that these illnesses are more serious and require a lot more treatment, and medicine is not going to be something that they're understanding. At this age, it's really common to see something called magical thinking. Magical thinking is what we call it when a child believes that their thoughts or actions caused a certain event to occur, such as a cancer diagnosis. So an example of that could be, I was mad at daddy last week and now he has cancer. Or I jumped too hard into mommy's arms last week and now she has cancer there. Me and my friend got in a fight at the playground and now my friend can't go to school because of her cancer. They will just make connections between things that aren't really logical, but it's just their process of exploring something that's very new to them and trying to understand it. And so it's very common. And so some adjustment behaviors that are typical for this age group that you may notice is a regression, meaning that they may act younger than they are. Some short and intense emotional outbursts, so those tantrums are coming up really quickly. They're not really prolonged. They're just, triggered really fast. A lot of repetition at this age is needed. They're going to ask questions over and over again. Why did grandma lose her hair? Why did grandma lose her hair? And they might ask that question many, many times. And repetition is going to be really important for them as they process and understand the changes. Separation anxiety is also common with this age. And then playing and acting out themes. It is not uncommon for kids at this age to start bringing in things like illness and cancer into their play. So if they're playing with their toys and one of the toys has cancer, sometimes it can be a little unnerving for some families, but just know that that's a really age-appropriate way to explore that theme that's new to them, and they're trying to kind of process it in their own way. And so here's some language recommendations, and I we'll kind of just read through it and explain, a couple pieces just to keep in mind. So we're going to be looking for simple and concrete language. So mommy has a small lump in her chest and it's called cancer. No one made the cancer happen. It happened on its own. And you can't catch cancer like a cold, so we can still give lots of hugs and kisses. Mommy has a new doctor and we'll get special medicine at the doctor's office to help. The cancer medicine may make mommy sleepy, so I might need to take more naps. Daddy's going to play with you while I nap. Do you have any questions? And so there's reassurances. No one made the cancer happen. It happened on its own. It can be common for kids at this age because they understand like germs a little bit and cancer and getting a cold. So they might think that cancer can be caught by germs. Letting them know some differences they're going to observe. Mom might be sleepy. She might need to take more naps. And some of those things they might notice. Mom might not be able to play as often, but here's a plan for that when and if it happens. So moving on to our elementary school age. So we're going to focus on the kind of the 6 to 8 years old. So before those preteen years. So they are going to be aware of simple versus serious illness, especially nowadays because of the pandemic. And again, that conversation has just been very at the forefront. However, they may have misinformation about cancer by this age, and that's just because of exposure to media and friends and neighbors and hearing about it. So around this age, they might know what cancer is or have heard about it before. And they also will be experiencing that magical thinking. So that still occurs at this age. And so what you may notice, and it's very similar, you have that age regression, increased worrying about their parents with cancer or their family member with cancer, questions about the physical changes. So at this age, they're more acutely aware of like physical differences. They're sponges. And for any of you that has a child at this age knows or has had a child at this age, they're sponges. They're absorbing everything. They're repeating everything. And so they might be very interested in the physical things they're noticing. If their loved one has a port, they might be very interested to learn more about that. If their parent has lost their hair. And it's not uncommon for children to distance themselves or be a little bit nervous about these changes. That can be very expected, if they see their uncle who has cancer and he's lost a lot of weight and they don't necessarily recognize him right away or don't feel as comfortable with him. That's very common. It's just them trying to process this physical change they're noticing. There may be anger and upset about routine changes or disruptions. There might be separation anxiety. That clinginess is still definitely common at this age. And then again, that playing and acting out in themes. So that theme of illness might be coming up in their own play. And so some language recommendations, it's going to still be very literal and concrete. And so it may be similar, but it's going to include maybe some more context, maybe even naming the cancer or giving it a simple name, kind of talking a little bit more about the medications and maybe even naming, chemotherapy, those kind of things. So in this example, remember how Grandpa has been having stomach aches for a while now. Well, Grandpa has something called cancer in his stomach. He's going to a new doctor who knows how to help him and is going to give him special medicine, help get rid of the cancer. Cancer medicine is very strong and may make him feel a little sick. So Grandpa won't be able to coach your soccer team this season. He's going to do is try to go to as many games as he can, and I will be there to watch you play. Do you have any questions? So it's very similar. You can start also, explaining, this doctor has a fancy name. It's called an oncologist, thinking of the words they might hear, because again, they're sponges. So if they're hearing like someone ask their parent, like, oh, did you see the oncologist today? They're going to be like, oh, who's that? So there's going to be a lot of curiosity at this age, and it's okay to start putting in some of those details, but still keeping it pretty simple, concrete, and focused on what's going to be observable and noticeable to them. So how are they going to be affected, and how are their routines going to be changed? So going into this preteen age or middle school age, so 9 to 12, and they're getting into those teen years, but not quite there yet. And so at this age, they will have a basic understanding of cancer. The likelihood of them having some type of exposure is going to keep increasing as they get older. And so through that media or friends, and with that increased exposure, increases the chances that they will have some type of misinformation. So it's really important to start thinking about, okay, I need to be checking in for understanding and seeing if I can catch some of those irrational beliefs or, misunderstandings at this age. Magical thinking may happen at the early age range, but they're going to start growing out of that as they get into 10 and 11. And they'll be bridging into more abstract or hypothetical thinking. A lot of what ifs questions come up. What if this happens? What if this happens? And so just to be prepared for those. So some of the adjustment behaviors you may notice in this age range, again, is that anger and upset, about their routines changing. They may start, hiding their feelings from loved ones. They might not be as expressive about it, and that might depend on that child's temperament. worrying that others will become sick. So again, a lot of that what if. So like, okay, well, dad got cancer. What if mom gets cancer? What if I get cancer? And it kind of can spiral for them. They want to try to understand all the different possibilities. Showing fear and sadness as anger. We often call anger a secondary emotion, and that's because anger can be really easy sometimes for a child or teen to just jump into, for adults too. And a lot of times there's something underneath that, like fear or sadness, that's triggering that anger. And there even might be some embarrassment that their parent is different. Again, those physical changes, this is an age where they're really looking for forming their identity and getting belonging and not feeling othered. And so, when their loved one is going through something that maybe their peers don't understand, it can make them maybe feel uncomfortable or embarrassed. And it's a really normal reaction. And, usually after the adjustment phase, that lessens. And so just to be aware of that. And so some of the language, and I won't read this whole thing, because of course, as you can imagine, as we get into these older age ranges, the conversations are going to become a little bit more complex and longer because they can understand more. But you're going to still have those similar reassurances, like no one made cancer happen. It happened on its own. We don't know why. Again, they're going to ask a lot of why and what if questions. And a lot of times there aren't an answer to those questions. I'm going to go in some more detail. So I have something called skin cancer. I have a new doctor, an oncologist, who will treat it. They will give me special medicine called chemotherapy or chemo to help. So, being able to add some of those details, the chemo makes me very sleepy, might upset my stomach, and it will even make my hair fall out. These are called side effects. So starting to kind of explain the terminology that they might hear and help them understand. And then I know, there'll be good days too. Those reassurances are going to be really important. And then you can validate that they might feel awkward, embarrassed. Some of the language around that might be, because of the chemo, my hair might fall out from the medicine, but it will grow back. I might look funny or different, and you might feel uncomfortable. If that happens, and that's okay. Like, we'll be okay. Mommy will be okay. It's just going to be a change that we'll have to get through together. So just letting them know it's okay if they feel kind of like, oh my gosh, this is so different. My mom looks different now, or my loved one looks different. So teenagers, so we're getting to 13 to 18. And so these conversations are going to also vary a lot based off of your teenager's temperament and kind of how they process information. Because of course, different developmental milestones come at different ages during this age range, 13 to 18. But what they'll be able to understand is they definitely will understand cancer now, and they'll probably be able to understand much more complex topics like just the medical aspects of treatment, understanding how hospitals work, having an understanding of emergency rooms and doctors' offices, and knowing what an IV is and things like that. And of course, with that may be more misinformation about cancer. So again, as they get exposed to more, that chance of that being there is going to be higher. Also at this age, they're going to be really in that more abstract and hypothetical thinking, and they may be engaging more with concepts of mortality, about life, about death. And so it's not uncommon that comes up more for this age range. And so some expected and appropriate adjusted behaviors you might see when someone they love has cancer might be, again, that upset around routine changes. That's really true across the board. They may not talk openly or share their feelings, and they may take that anger and frustration out on loved ones, their safe people, the people they feel most comfortable with. Emotional regulation expression can be really tough at this age. It's especially going through puberty and with hormones and mood swings. It can just be a very volatile age for emotions. And they may confide in friends more than family members. It is really common that at this age, they're going to be retreating to their peers versus their family members for support. Sometimes we hear from parents that their teen hasn't talked about it since they found out, and they're worried about that. And then when we talk to the teenager, they're like, I have been talking about it just to my friends at school. And that's very normal for this age. It's just a part of where they are in their social development. And so the language recommendations, again, are going to begin a little bit more detailed. So I won't read through each one specifically, but also these slides were sent by email. So that way you can refer to them. And I think they'll be sent out again after this presentation, so for you to refer to. So we're going to be getting into more detail with these conversations, and keeping in mind that by by the time they're teenagers, they can Google. So if there's something they can Google, kind of be thinking about, okay, that might be something either I want to address, like you might Google this and it might feel kind of scary Googling it. Just keep in mind that each case is different, or just if they're going to find out the information really easily by looking it up on their own, wanting to incorporate that information in this conversation. So I have something called melanoma. It is a skin cancer. So kind of bringing in the actual names sometimes, or if I have something called leukemia, it's a cancer in my blood. My doctor for this is an oncologist, and she has a plan. She'll treat this medicine with medicine called chemotherapy, or we're going to be doing something called radiation. Again, kind of talking about these side effects, what they're going to notice. And especially with teens, they may be responsibilities that they'll start helping out with. So you might want to mention that in these conversations, on days that I have radiation, I'm going to be gone and at the doctor's for a while. And so I'm going to need a little bit more help on those days, but you're not going to be the only one helping. Dad and grandma's going to come and help too, letting them ask questions. What would be helpful for you to know? What would you like me to tell you about? Going sometimes those why questions, you can get into a little more detail. So they ask, like, why did you get cancer? Of course, sometimes there is a genetic component to some cancers, and it's okay to start getting into that at this age. And of course, it's going to really depend on the situation. But for instance, some of that language could be, I'm currently getting some tests to see if this is a type of cancer you get from random, or if it's a type of cancer you get that's spread through family genes. You don't need to be worried about this right now. If you are needing any additional tests after I get my test, I will let you know and we'll talk about it together. But right now, it's nothing that you need to worry about. So letting them know those things, if it's applicable, and just keeping in mind that those questions, when they ask those whys, you can get into a little bit more of that detail. And again, preparing them for the new responsibilities is going to be probably the most important piece. So like if they need to pick up, be the one that walks their brother home from school after school on 2 days a week, letting them know that, but also making sure you're balancing that with some rewards. So I know you're going to be picking up your brother from home on Tuesday, Thursdays from school, but on Fridays you'll never have to pick him up on a Friday, because I know that's an important day for you to hang out with your friends after school, or you have club that after school. So trying to keep that balance for them is really important. And so talking to your child or teen about cancer is not a one-time conversation. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's so much to think about having a conversation, this can be broken up into many conversations. And even after this initial conversation, there's going to be many more down the road. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and if your child can't process all the information, or if they're shutting down a little bit, or they don't have many things to say, that's okay. You can always talk about more of the details when they're ready. And we really want to make ongoing and open communication a priority. That way they can keep those questions coming and they can feel comfortable to ask them once they are ready. And I apologize for the phone ringing in the background right now. For older children, we want to discuss what they want to know and communicate accordingly. Do they want updates? How often do they want updates? Giving them some autonomy about that. It's okay if this conversation is emotional. And if you're finding yourself, tearful or getting emotional during this conversation, sometimes that can feel uncomfortable. And we have this instinct to hide that from the child. But we actually really want to model that it's okay to feel emotional when talking about something that's emotional. It's okay to get teary. It's okay to talk about things that scare you or make you sad. And so, of course, as long as you're able to engage in the conversation, but it's okay if it is an emotional one. And you can model that and show the child or teen that it's okay to be feeling these emotions. And don't feel pressured to cover all this information at once. It's okay not to know all the answers, because there's going to be a lot with cancer treatment that you don't necessarily know the answers. Sometimes you might be having this conversation before a treatment plan's even been made. And so it's okay to say, I don't know. But when we find out, we'll talk about it. Or I don't know if there's an answer to that one. And I know that's really frustrating. And of course, providing that ongoing reassurance is going to be a really important piece of this continued communication, because across ages, but especially with those younger kids, there's going to be a lot of worries and concerns and that magical thinking that we talked about. So letting them know, your needs will be met. You will be taken care of. I know things are changing, but the things that are really important are going to stay. Nothing you did caused my cancer. It's not your fault. Cancer is not contagious, and any question you have is okay. Ask us anything. If we can't answer it right now, we'll try to answer it another time. So I know that was a lot of information. And so next we're going to kind of be shifting gears, and the next half of the webinar is going to be focused on actual strategies and activities and resources that you can use to support these children. So that's what we've talked about, is kind of, okay, how do we even have these conversations and what language should we use? And now it's like, okay, what's the tangible things that we can actually start incorporating to help build them their own web of support? And so I want to start this section by having everyone take just a moment to reflect on who or what makes up your own web of support. So think about the people, the places, organizations that already serve a really important role for you and your family and the child that you want to support, and be thinking of them as I'm going through these different facets of support. So that way you can start plugging in, okay, this is a person that can do that for me, or this is an organization that maybe we can see if they can give us some more support or have some activities that my child can do. And that way you can start kind of developing a plan for what that web of support is going to look like for your individual family and situation. And so what we're talking about here is connecting with your support system. And I'm going to start with just talking about the general community. So a lot of these supports may be already exist in the community that you live in or the community that you've built around you. And so one of those things is encouraging connection with non-parent adult supports. I really want to emphasize that pre-existing relationships, family support and siblings are going to be really effective. So people that they already have a strong connection with, but maybe a coach, maybe a teacher, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone at their church, someone that they already get a lot of support from, encouraging those connections, especially when it's the parent who has cancer. It's helpful for them to know which adults they can turn to for help when they are having a lot of emotions or just needing some more support. We want to continue the sports and after school activities. So what that child already enjoys doing, we want to really maintain that routine. Of course, there may be changes that have to happen, like, if they were doing 3 sports, maybe we have to cut it down to 2, those kind of things because of just bandwidth, but really trying to continue those activities that child or teen gets enjoyment from. Reach out to friends or family for help. And so not only is that important just for your own bandwidth as you're trying to navigate these changes, but it also models for your child or teen the importance of being able to ask for help when they need it, that there's other people they can reach out to. That's really important for that piece about reassuring that their needs will be met and that there will be ways to problem solve around these really difficult situations, and that there's people that can support them. And that may be friends, that may be family, might be community members, whoever that is for you. Kind of thinking about those people, and it can even be helpful to generate like a list of those people and put it on the fridge. That way your child and teen knows, okay, who are the people that can help us. And give choices whenever possible. Again, a lot of change is happening. So for younger kids, that might be structured choices like who would you like to take care of you today? Uncle or grandma? Do you want to go to the park with grandma during mommy's appointment today, or would you like to go on a play date with your friend down the street? So even though they have to spend some time away from their caregiver, their loved one with cancer, giving them structured choices so they feel they have a little bit of autonomy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about school, because children are at school for significant portions of their week, making it a really important part of their web of support. There's a lot of people that can help them in the school system during these situations. And so when thinking about telling the school, and I do recommend that, especially if the person with cancer is in their immediate family, as a parent or sibling, letting the school know, and then giving your child choice on how they want the school staff to be informed. So maybe saying, I am going to let the school know that your sister has cancer. Is there anyone at school that you'd like to tell yourself? They will have to know, but if you want to tell someone before I do, let me know, and you can tell them yourself. This is really important for teens because they have lots of different teachers, they have lots of different classes, and there might be certain adults at school that they've built a connection to. Maybe it's their favorite teacher or their counselor, and they want to share their story and information themselves. It gives them that chance of autonomy. It's also very possible that, they'll be like, you just do it, and they don't really want to have that conversation. And that's okay too. And make a plan with the school counselor, school social worker. So even though I would say a lot of times, and I really want to stress this actually, that as much as there's those adjustment behaviors that we've talked about, in the long run, most kids and teens actually cope really well after someone in their life has been diagnosed with cancer. Once they get through that adjustment period, a lot of times that they cope well, and school can be a really big piece of that. And so we don't always see that children or teens actually need a coping plan at school. However, we do recommend one be made anyways in the beginning. And that's because it can reduce anxiety. It lets the student know, okay, this is what I can do if I get upset during class or if I need more support. But it also allows there to be a plan in place. So if they are having a hard time coping or something does come up, it's already been talked about. And that way it doesn't have to take added stress for the family to quickly figure out, okay, how can we support my child at school? And so that just might, initial check-in with the counselor, the school social worker, and saying, if you need a break, or if, something comes up in class that makes you upset, or if, you're thinking about your loved one, or maybe they're having surgery, or they're having a big doctor's appointment that's important and they're having trouble concentrating. What can you do at school to let people know, hey, I need a little bit more support. I need a little bit more time. I might need to step out, those kinds of things, and making that plan before really that child or teen needs one. Of course, talk with the teachers, kind of hear from them how things are going. I'll get into some of the signs of that more support is needed later on in the presentation, but teachers can be a really great information source to know, okay, are they having a harder time concentrating? Are they noticing they're withdrawing more from peers? This is a set of adults that are having eyes on that child and will be able to give some of that information and help parents know if something is needed or there's needs not being met. But of course, ask the teachers and counselors to let you know when things are going well too. That information is just as important as knowing if they are struggling. We really want to celebrate the good work. We want to celebrate when, they are able to do the things that they want to do, and that's important to them. And lastly, I really want to emphasize that we want to maintain their routine and encourage attendance. It can be really tempting at times to let, and sometimes students might not want to go to school because they're thinking about their loved one, or they're worried about their loved one, or they're just wanting to be at home and not be at school. And although there's sometimes that's appropriate for sure, in general, we really want to encourage attendance and that routine. That structure is going to help them adjust to the changes faster. It's going to help with coping, and it's going to allow them to be able to connect to that social support. That's going to be really important. And we want to kind of avoid withdrawing behaviors. So now let's talk a little bit about home. What can you do in the home? And so first thing is using books to help with these conversations about emotions and cancer. So in that email that you got before this presentation, as well as the one that you'll get afterwards, I have our Life with Cancer book list of recommendations for varying age groups. And this list covers topics around cancer in addition to emotions, anxiety, mindfulness, relaxation techniques, and things like that. And books can just be really helpful in not only allowing you to have a tool to talk about cancer, but also something that you can just put in the rotation, leave around the house, and that the kids can explore these themes on their own and kind of read through these books. It can be just a nice tool for them too. Do activities that encourage new coping skills and mindfulness, especially if you're noticing these adjustment behaviors, like, increased irritability and clinginess, and finding ways, okay, how can maybe we start incorporating some coping skills into our family routine? Maybe we're having, quiet time, if they're getting really overstimulated, there's so much happening, more people are in the house. How can we maybe have like an hour every weekend where it's quiet and we all just we kind of do independent and get to work and just have some time away from each other? Sometimes it can be pretty overwhelming, the amount of people that are coming in, doing different sensory activities. There's things like calm down jars, which you can Google instructions for, that you can put glitter and water and glue in like a mason jar or water bottle, and they can shake it and have something that can be kind of a sensory stimulus that can help them calm down. Teaching them doing deep breathing together, listening to nice music, having kind of just those things incorporated into the routine can be really helpful. Have family time around activities that are not cancer related. So think about what your families or your favorite activities to do with that child are, and see it, okay, as much as possible, can we continue doing those things? If for whatever reason, maybe the family really likes to go on hikes together and now dad can't really do the hikes anymore. Okay, how can we adapt that activity so that we can still be doing something outside and active that's maybe a little bit more accessible for dad? And so doing those family activities, having time that's not focused around the cancer, where cancer is not a focus of the conversation. And as I mentioned, we really want to be providing balance for additional responsibilities. And so this really helps the older children adjust to these new responsibilities. There may be some frustration about it, like, oh, I have to go and walk my brother home from school. I don't want to do that. And so helping them adjust to some of these new responsibilities that are necessary. They're changes that have to be made because of this, routine change due to the treatment. But also by providing balance, it can establish boundaries to make sure everyone in the home is feeling supported. So yes, they're having some new responsibilities, but also, that boundary is that they don't walk their brother home from school on Fridays because that's when they have their club. And respecting those boundaries and having that leeway so that way they can adjust to those new responsibilities. Some younger kids really like helping out and they want to help out. They see that things are different. They want to, be able to contribute. And so finding age appropriate ways for them to do so. That might be, they get to tuck mom into bed or they get to make breakfast one day for grandma, those kind of things. And then encouraging the coping skills that have worked in the past. If your child's ever had difficulty with mental health or anxiety before, or there's ever been a challenging time, maybe they have had someone else in their life that's had cancer, think about, okay, what helped then? And those are going to be the first things you're going to turn to. What has helped before? And then adding these new things in if they need some additional support. And in the last part of this web of support conversation, I'm going to talk about kind of what you can do about treatment. And so this is going to be the piece that a lot of kids and teens will not have had a lot of experience with and might be very new. And so how can we help them adjust to this idea that their loved one is going through cancer treatment? So as much as possible, include them in big changes or discussions. And so, that might look like if there's going to be a surgery that's going to result in a physical difference, maybe a mastectomy or something like that, kind of letting them know beforehand and helping them be maybe a part of, we're going to rearrange the living room because mom's going to have to lay down here for a while. So help me, figure out what we can get for her and make a care basket for her. Letting them feel like they can contribute to that experience. Another example is like hair loss. For some people, when they make the decision to maybe shave their head, that can be a very personal decision. And so some people don't necessarily want people to be there for it, or it's very intimate. They might not want their kids present, and that is okay because that is a really personal decision. So if that's the case, letting your child, like your younger child, decorate a hat or having your team pick out a headscarf for you to wear. That way they can feel like they're included. If that person is comfortable with people being there, if they're choosing to shave their head and they want that to be an experience they share, I've even seen, parents let their teenager, do the first shave or like having them be present for it can be another way to help them feel included. Use visuals to explain kind of what these new words they're hearing. That could be pictures, FaceTime, kind of touring them around the medical space. And this is important because especially for kids younger, they might not even understand what a hospital looks like, what an infusion room looks like, what an IV looks like, what a radiation machine looks like. There's all these words they're going to be hearing and they're literally like, I can't even visualize what's going on. And that can feel scary for their parent to be going to this place every single day to get radiation, which might sound scary. And they don't even know what that looks like or what that's like. And so even going on Google and finding pictures or taking pictures of the medical space and showing your child and having that be a part of these conversations can help them start visualizing and make it feel a little less unknown, a little less scary. Discuss schedule and routines for upcoming treatment. So, clarify what that might look like with them, who will be picking them up from school on treatment days, how will their schedule be affected, and reestablish plans in place for making sure everyone knows what's going on, that someone's going to be with them, and that they know how to get in touch as needed. So if mom and dad are going to be in a doctor's appointment today, who can they reach out to? Who's going to be that person that's going to be there If something were to come up, they can call. Also, just check out the resources at local hospitals. Every cancer center and program has different resources for families. There's child life specialists involved. Of course, a lot of people think of child life when they think about children's hospitals and pediatric settings, but even for the adult side, child life specialists are available to help if your child's coming to visit you or visit their adult loved one inpatient. Child life can help facilitate. They can have activities, and they are really great in helping explain some of these medical pieces that need with really great language and examples and dolls and things like that. So that's something to think about. Some of the nearby hospitals that you can that might have different programs. Of course, there's the Inova Shower Institute, which is where Life with Cancer is. There's Pediatric Specialists of Virginia, Children's National DC, Virginia Cancer Specialists. So there's a lot of different cancer centers in the area that will all have their own programs and things to support families through this treatment process that have kids involved. So I'm not going to get to some actual tangible activities to try out and things that you can actually do with the child that you're hoping to support. And the first one I want to share is actually the one if I had to pick an activity for any family to do, especially if the patient with cancer is in the home, it's going to be this one. It's going to be having a family calendar. And some of you might be like, well, of course we have a family calendar. We have a calendar that we put up on, in the kitchen. And I'm going to be talking about specifically a calendar that is going to be tracking treatment schedule. That could be something you incorporate into the family calendar you already have, but also just having a space that's a visual that keeps track of treatment schedule, appointments, upcoming routine changes, somewhere in an easy place that the kids and teens can refer to in the home without having to ask for that information. We really want to lessen the barriers for them to be able to access this information because sometimes it's hard for them to ask, especially with teens. Sometimes they don't want to ask because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about cancer, but then they're like, I really want to ask mom if I can do this, but I don't know if she's going to be having chemo that day. I can't remember. And so having a place, and the image I have here is just, there's lots of places that also have visuals or stickers that you can use to show this is a radiation day, but even just writing it. But it's just a way to have that information be available to them in a way that they can access without the adult, having to give them that information. A wonders and worries box or jar. It can be done in a box or a jar. And this is really great for our younger kids under age 12. But I've seen teens use it too. And this would be, you keeping a jar or a box that your children can write down either their wonders, which are questions, or their worries about cancer. What this activity can be helpful for is even during this initial conversation, they might not have their questions or worries right away, or they might not want to say them out loud. And so giving the opportunity that, okay, we're going to keep this jar. There's going to be sticky notes. If you have a question about cancer, if you have a worry about cancer, you can write it down, fold it up and put it in the jar. And then at a time together, we'll go through everything that's in the jar and talk about it. This is also a really great strategy to use if you have a kid who's asking a lot of questions all the time, and then maybe it's at times that you're not prepared to answer the question or you might not know the answer. It's a way to redirect them so that they can still feel heard, they can still share that question, but you can also have some control over when and how you share that information. A treatment chain. This is an activity that we can do with all ages, and it can be a way to help the kids in the home or the kids affected kind of keep track of the treatment journey. So for each, it's just making those paper chains, get construction paper and rectangles, tape them together, and then create that paper link. And creating a link for each step in the treatment journey. And this can be helpful for helping children understand that cancer is not when you get a cold, you take your cold medicine. If you have a runny nose, you take this medicine and then in a couple of days it's gone. Cancer usually has a lot of steps that go into treatment. You have scans, you have, mapping for radiation. So they figure out how they're going to do the radiation. Then you do the radiation and then you get to ring the bell, but then you might have to do chemo after that. There's so many things that might happen. And so keeping track of all those steps not only allow them to kind of understand, okay, this is a process, but it also lets them acknowledge and celebrate these little steps too. We don't have to wait to celebrate until the very, very end of treatment. We can celebrate all these little steps that we're making together, that we're working hard together. And then the chain can be this kind of visual representation of everything that the family's done, and incorporating the happy things too, like, oh, after mom finished radiation, we went to Disney World, even though she, and then she had her scans after that. Even once remission happens, there's still going to be scans, right? There's going to be maintenance scans. There's going to be, observation. And so it's another way to kind of explain that more complex part of cancer treatment. Medical play. So by that, I talked a lot about how kids explore these themes through play. And that's very appropriate. And we want to facilitate that. So you can either buy a doctor's kit, or if you have a friend or family member that has one, borrowing it. Just things that have those little stethoscopes and those different tools and medical things. This not only allows them in their independent play to appropriately explore things that they're hearing, but it also gives you some more visuals to use when you're explaining. So maybe you're saying, okay, there's going to be a thermometer if mommy ever gets a temperature, we have to make sure we go to the ER, because sometimes when she's getting her medicine, her immune system can't fight illnesses, and we have to make sure she's not sick. Or explaining, this is what when mommy goes to the hospital, these are the kind of things that happen. Or if they have a sibling who maybe got their port accessed, being able to facilitate a play situation around that can help the child who's not the one that has cancer understand a little bit more about what's been going on in a really appropriate way. Special time, and that's really what we call any time that you're spending time with that child or teen one-on-one, with no interruptions, and they're doing a preferred activity for them. And so this is going to be protected time that's typical. And we really want to encourage it's one-on-one. So even though there's multiple children affected, kind of giving them each their own opportunity. A lot of children and teens can sometimes feel like they don't get as much attention as maybe they used to when there's cancer treatment. And so we want to provide those opportunities. So, okay, I know that we haven't gotten to spend as much time together. What do you want to do? We're going to have 2 hours on Saturday. What do you want to do? Maybe the teen is like, I want to, go to the basketball court and then go get bubble tea. And then kind of having that time together can just be really great to have that connection between the two of you, that time spent, and to have that time away from the cancer conversation. And lastly, I did want to include an activity for something, especially if the person with cancer is not in the immediate household. Maybe it's a friend or a neighbor, and doing something as simple as hospital room decorations, especially if that person is going to be spending a lot of time inpatient, or even decorations they can put up in their room at home. It can be cards, it can be things of artwork to put up on the walls, things like that, can be a way for that child or teen to feel involved and like they're contributing, and they're able to leave something special and connect with their loved one, even if there's going to be barriers, like they can't come visit, or they haven't seen them in a while. And it can also be something that the patient can really enjoy too. So we're going to talk a little bit about resources, and we're getting close to the end. So we're going to be doing some resources, and then I'm going to talk about kind of what to look out for if support outside of these general resources are needed. So I mentioned previously that books can be a great strategy to engage children and adolescents in conversations about cancer, as well as provide education and help them adjust to this new normal. And so you will be getting our book list, but I wanted to highlight 2 organizations that are worth checking out to obtain a few age-appropriate books about cancer for free. The first is the Bright Spot Network. It is a national organization that focuses on parents with cancer who have young children. So it's definitely geared for under 10. Through their Bright Reads program, you can obtain up to 4 age-appropriate books about cancer for children under 10 years old. And I also just included some of their other programs that I think are really great. Like their Bright Grants program provides financial assistance, and their Bright Boxes are arts and craft boxes that they'll send to your house for free for kids focused on 6 years and younger to help facilitate that special time. They hear often, and we hear it too, that parents with small children who are going through cancer treatment, it can be really hard for them to engage in play because of the fatigue and side effects. And so the Bright Boxes provide like, okay, here's a, easy to do craft that's still fun that parents can use to have that special time. And then Living Beyond Breast Cancer is not only a wonderful resource for patients and families affected by breast cancer and just provides a lot of different programs and resources, but they also have a book program called Reading for Reassurance. And they will provide up to 2 books to families with children under 18 years old. So they include books for teens as well who have a loved one diagnosed with breast cancer. So obviously, social support is a big piece in this. Sometimes the children and teens just want to feel like they're not alone in this cancer experience. A big one is Camp Kesum. They offer free camps for children with a parent who has or has had cancer. These camps are hosted on college campuses. And in addition to summer camps, they provide year-long retreats and other activities. And they're usually facilitated by college campuses. So I included some of the local ones to think about. And then Life with Cancer has 2 different social programs. We have Life with Cancer Teens Connect, which is for teens 13 to 18 who have a loved one with cancer. It doesn't have to be a parent, it could be a sibling, parent, grandparent, just someone in their life that has cancer. And we do, like, every other month, we also do like an in-person activity. So like in August, we did tie-dye. In October, we painted pumpkins. So, some type of activity where they can just spend time with one another. Life with Cancer also has the Curious About Cancer program. This is a 5-week series for children 7 to 11 years old who have a loved one with cancer. And it teaches them about cancer in an age-appropriate way. It's run by our art therapist. And it also teaches them coping skills and share about the things that have been hard. And that's offered 2 times a year. It's offered in the spring and the fall. So speaking of Life with Cancer, of course, there's lots of different local cancer organizations. And so Life with Cancer is a resource here in the DMV. We provide services for both adults and pediatrics, including education programs, nurse navigation, counseling, support groups, fitness classes, and then events throughout the year. All of our services are completely free. We do not bill for anything, and the patient does not need to be treated at a NOVA. So even though we're housed within the NOVA health system, a patient can be getting treated at Virginia Cancer Specialists. They can be getting treated at Johns Hopkins. It doesn't matter where they're being treated. They're still eligible for our programs. Some other organizations to know about is Nueva Vida. They provide cancer support and resources specifically for the Latinx population in the DMV area. So they have a lot of Spanglish language resources. Hope Connections for cancer support. They also have a lot of different programs. Their in-person programming is over in Maryland, but they have a lot of virtual events. Stepsisters is a program that provides practical support to patients and families affected by breast cancer in the Northern Virginia and DMV area. So some of those resources might be financial assistance, care packages, gift cards that sometimes can help arrange to pay for 1 or 2 house cleanings, things like that. And then lastly, the Smith Center for Healing. Life with Cancer collaborates with them often. They provide support groups, retreats, and they really focus on the expressive arts, which are therapy modalities like art therapy, music therapy, things that are kind of focusing on that creative process to manage and adjust to these changes in these really difficult situations. So the last thing I'm going to talk about before we get into the Q&A is, okay, so we've talked about cancer, what to expect, and what those normal adjusted behaviors are going to be. But what do we do if these behaviors go outside of that and we need more support? So although some of these changes are to be expected, there will be some changes in behavior, there may be some changes in mood. It is important to know what to look out for if that kind of goes beyond and gets into that more significant realm of changes that are more noticeable, uncharacteristic, and aren't really going away. So we're going to be thinking about things like persistent increased sadness, anxiety, or anger. It's not just for the adjustment period. The sadness is not going away. It's uncharacteristic for them. Persistent self-isolation at home or in school. It's going beyond them just not wanting to go home to school, right after the parent diagnosed. And now it's been a fight to get them to go to school for weeks and for months. Experiencing new difficulties at school. So all of a sudden their grades are really dropping, or they're unable to complete their assignments, or they used to participate a lot in class and now they kind of just sit in the back, and things that are significant changes that weren't happening before. And then a really big one is loss of interest in activities they once enjoyed. So things that were used to motivate them. They loved going to soccer practice and now they never want to go anymore, or they really had a great circle of friends that they spent a lot of time with and really enjoyed, and now they never see them anymore, and they always are saying no to hanging out. And so it is what we're looking for is a significant social, emotional, behavioral, or academic changes that either are increased intensity, increased frequencies that are happening often, or notable duration, meaning they're happening for a long time. It's not just, for a month or so after the diagnosis. It is important to note that although you may notice some of these changes, it is the changes that are accompanied with some type of impairment or inability to function during daily life. So all of a sudden, because they're having these emotional changes, they're no longer able to sleep. They're not going to school. They're unable to build friendships. They're unable to participate in activities. They can't, talk about things the way that they used to. And so if your child is experiencing any of these types of changes, the next step is to consider what professional or outside support is needed. This will depend on the severity of your child's distress, their specific needs, and what has helped them in the past. So before I get into kind of the community supports, I do always, and it's so important to me that families know what to do if your child or teen ever expresses thoughts of self-harm or suicide. This isn't common that we see stemming from cancer and cancer diagnosis and changes related to cancer, but is of course something that can happen. And it's just really important to me to be very clear about what the next steps are for that. So if your child is expressing thoughts of self-harm or suicide, this is definitely a sign of concern, and please reach out to immediate support by going to your nearest emergency room at your local hospital, or you can utilize the Maryfield Crisis Response Center. And I've also included some other resources. And I just want to emphasize that Life with Cancer and a lot of the other local organizations I've mentioned are not crisis support. So if you're noticing that these thoughts are happening and that these concerning behaviors are happening, please reach out to immediate support, and then we can address, anything that's cancer related after that has been addressed. So if that is not the case, and I hope it's not the case, but you are noticing changes in your child's emotions or behaviors that are affecting their daily life, consider what community supports might be available. So like we talked about, that web of support, that's where this is going to get really important. So letting your child's school counselor know, okay, they're struggling a little bit more. I think they're having a hard time with this adjustment. So that way the school can kind of keep an eye on things, see what resources they can provide, since again, they're at school for a really significant portion of the day. If your child or teen has ever seen a community therapist, or if they're currently seeing a community therapist, continue with those scheduled appointments or think about reestablishing. With kids, established relationships are always going to be more effective than introducing a new person. So if there are people already in their life that they have a positive relationship with that can address this need, we want to go to them first. And then if maybe that therapist won't be a good fit right now, or they haven't really had that type of support before, then thinking about, okay, let's add something. So I want to talk a little bit, circling back to Life with Cancer, about the pediatric support we have available. We have different services ranging from providing support directly to the parents through education and consultations, as well as direct support to the children through groups or individual therapy. We have 2 locations, the Family Center in Fairfax, and then we also have an office, the Inova Loudoun Hospital in Leesburg, and we provide in-person and telehealth support. For our groups like the Curious About Cancer program or Teens Connect program, those are really open to any child or teen that would benefit from them. For our short-term individual therapy, I really want to emphasize it's short-term, so we focus on the cancer-related distress. So if there's other things, if your child has had pre-existing mental health concerns that need to be addressed, it might be better for those to be addressed by a community provider, but we can help focus on the cancer-specific piece. If you're ever interested in Life with Cancer support, the first step is to contact us through either our Connect line or the email, which I have highlighted here. Then you will be prompted to complete an intake form, talk to our intake coordinator, and then we will help guide you on what the best next steps are. And please note that even though I didn't talk specifically about grief or bereavement during this webinar, we do have support available, as well as resources that we can direct you towards that do provide that type of support. And we have that here as well. So please reach out by email if those are resources you're interested in. So we are wrapping up the information portion of today's class. So I just wanted to summarize the key takeaways, the things that I want you to be able to walk away today remembering. And first and foremost, that is the honest, age-appropriate communication about cancer and treatment is encouraged. So these conversations are important to be had, as difficult as they can be. Some changes in behavior and mood are to be expected. You might notice they're more irritable. They might be more clingy. There might be some things that they weren't doing before happening. And those are adjustment behaviors, and that will happen. But what we want to look out for is if the child is experiencing significant challenges that impact their daily functioning, they can't do their daily life tasks, their routine, then they might benefit from support either from us or one of the other local programs. So I will open it up for then the Q&A. And so again, just keep your question, hopefully the questions are kept general so we can protect your private information. And I have our email up here too for additional questions, or if you do have something more personal you'd like to discuss.
Thank you, Gemma. This was a lot of really incredible information. So we just had a question in the chat, and I know there had been one in the registration for if it is a stage 4 diagnosis. So we understand that stage 4 can be treatable, but not always. Could you speak to that just a little bit of how that might change some of the recommendations you've made, how to have those conversations and maybe break that up by age? That would be really helpful.
Yes, of course. So with stage 4, of course, that the conversation does get more complicated, right? And we talk about it, it's a more advanced form of cancer. And so again, a helpful place to start as far as the recommendations is, okay, what is going to be most noticeable and what kind of is happening first? Again, that question of what's happening first. For kids that are younger, and we're talking, like the preschool age kids and maybe the younger half of the elementary aged kiddos, you don't necessarily need to start right away with, even though this can be treatable, it might not necessarily be curable. And that's something that happens sometimes with stage 4. You can have stage 4 cancer for many, many, many years, right? It can be treatable, but sometimes it's not necessarily curable. And so, thinking about, okay, what's happening first? And sometimes that's not necessarily something you need to get into right away. If it's a stage 4 diagnosis, but, there's treatments available. And at the moment, the treatments are feeling good. And that's the plan, starting with that and just talking with those younger age kids about, okay, what's the treatment happening right now? Of course, if those questions of like, oh, okay, well, when is the cancer going to be gone? Then that might open up that opportunity to talk about, some cancer can go away with treatment and some cancer can't go away. It's always going to be in the body, but the medicine is keeping the way that the cancer affects my body as small as it can be. So it's making sure that the cancer, even though it's going to be in my body, isn't going to affect the different organs and pieces in my body as much. And that's what the cancer is doing. So kind of explaining what the purpose of the medicine is. Some medicine, helps you don't get rid of an illness, but some medicine just makes sure that the side effects of things that the illness causes don't keep me from doing the things I really want to do. Of course, with older teens, that conversation can be more frank too, of just explaining, this type of cancer, if this is the case. And of course, there's so many, sometimes stage 4 can, reach a point where it's, considered, can go into remission. So this is all very specific, just different scenarios. But if it is a situation where the cancer is not necessarily going to be curable, having that conversation of the purpose of the medicine right now is to do its best to get the cancer as small as possible. But the doctors aren't thinking that it's going to be able to make the cancer go away completely. We're still working really hard, though, to get it as small and manageable as possible. And if anything changes with that, I'll let you know. And kind of just starting there and explaining and letting them lead what the rest of the conversation will look like. Of course, that can turn into a conversation of, okay, what if, especially teenagers might ask, like, okay, but what if it never goes away? And like, what will happen? What if the treatment isn't doing that? And that can turn into a conversation of, if the medicine isn't able to make the cancer get small or not affect my body, it at that point will start making my organs not work the way that they need to. But we'll talk about that when we get there. And I think that's the really important piece, is that we don't need to overload them with all the information right away and think about, okay, is this something that's happening soon enough that it's worth bringing into the conversation right now? And so those are kind of some of the assessments to do, but that's kind of the language I recommend that you kind of tweak depending on the age, is talking about the purpose of the medicine. So some medicine makes something go away completely, and some medicine is just going to make the side effects go down, make the cancer not affect my organs as much, or make it as small as possible. I might not get all the way gone. It won't get so small that it will go away, but it'll get small enough that I won't really feel it in my body, and it'll keep me being able to do the things I'm doing.
Thank you. Another question we received is, what age group do you recommend the activity stickers for the calendar?
Calendar. Really, I think those are really important, especially for kids that might not be at a high reading level yet. Having visuals can help them, like, okay, on the sticker that has, this image, and you can even use other stickers too for those kids. If you have kids that are young and they don't really read yet, just having certain images that represent certain treatment days can even be helpful. So I think definitely for kids that are going to be more visual, but I think if there's teens in the home, I think that can be helpful too. They can quickly glance at it and kind of see what's going on, but I think really the visuals can be helpful for those kids that are probably like 10 and below, that visual cue is going to be important for them to remember. Oh, that's what radiation means. I remember mom telling me that sticker means radiation. That's what that picture means. And so that way, if they don't remember the words, they can remember generally what that sticker is trying to indicate.
And then we had a question about how to support not only the individual as they recover from cancer, but also the family. Just after having gone through this experience, what recommendations might you have? I know you talked about some ongoing big concerns, but just in general to help transition back to the new normal after would be helpful.
Yes. And that's a big question, right? Because, cancer treatment can feel really intense, and it feels like it takes up so much when it's happening. And so then when the treatment stops and we get into this period of maybe remission or no evidence of disease, and so maybe it's just kind of getting scans every 6 months is what it's turned into. You can expect sometimes some heightened anxiety actually during that time. Sometimes that surprises families, that the kids and the teens will actually heighten in their anxiety after treatment has concluded, and that things are looking good and there's no evidence of cancer in the body. And that's when they start being like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And it's because they did get adjusted to what was happening, and that was the normal that they had become accustomed to. And now this idea of, okay, well, are we going to have to do that again? And is it really over? And can we really kind of relax right now? And I think definitely with those, when that is coming up, validating it and saying, I know it's really hard to get used to this. And sometimes they don't want to share it because they feel bad that they're feeling anxious or worried now, because shouldn't they be feeling not that way? And so I think modeling that for them, I'm still having a really hard time believing that we're done with that piece, that journey, and opening up that conversation for them to mirror that and be like, yeah, it's kind of weird that we're not doing that anymore. I think also being mindful and respectful about language, especially if you're someone that is supporting a family. So maybe you weren't in the immediate family that was impacted by cancer, but you've been supporting them, you're a family member or a loved one. Keeping in mind that, this topic of remission and whether the cancer is cured and stuff can be triggering for families, because that anxiety doesn't just go away once they've concluded treatment and there's no evidence of cancer in the body. There's always that kind of lingering thought of recurrence, and especially in those months and year afterwards. And so just being respectful of that language of, like, especially if you're helping them celebrate this step, being like, we're celebrating the end of treatment. We're celebrating the end of daily radiation. We're celebrating and kind of like, we're celebrating that piece, because for some families, they don't want to say things like, we're celebrating that the cancer is gone, and they're just not ready for that, or it just doesn't feel very comfortable for them. And so keeping that in mind as you're supporting them, being just mindful of your language that you're using and asking them, like, what language do you want us to use, and checking in with them. And also keeping in mind that cancer might become a trigger point for those kids. So if they find out, especially if it was really, really hard when their parent or loved one went through cancer, and then now they're hearing their friend's parent is going through cancer, they find out their neighbor or their teacher is going through cancer, expect that there might be some emotions that will bubble up, and fear, anxiety, and it kind of brings all of that back in. We definitely see some things that we call PTSD responses for families that are in this remission period because it was hard. And so normalizing and validating that and kind of emphasizing those reassurances of every situation is different, right? There's no cancer one size fits all. Every treatment's going to look like something different. Every diagnosis is something different. And that focusing again on those things that helped before, what helps them get through their cancer experience and how can they use that now.
Jemma, you have been phenomenal, and I do hope that those who have been able to join us this morning and who are watching this later will reach out to you. We will be sharing some resources you've shared. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up today?
No, I think this basically covers it. We will have those resources with the book list as well as our fact sheets. And in those fact sheets, I do want to say, although we didn't talk about grief and bereavement and those topics during this presentation, in those resources do include our fact sheet about having those conversations around grief and loss. And if those are resources you're looking into learning more about, please reach out and we're happy to talk more about it.
Thank you so much. I hope that everyone has a wonderful day. I hope you will reach out for support. And again, thank you for all that you offer this community. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Bye. Thank you.